Singapore is a great city to which foreigners resorted in great numbers, so that the fame of the city and its greatness spread throughout the world. How long ago do you think this could apply to Singapore? 10 years ago? 1965, when Singapore was independent? 1819, when the British arrived? The real answer is 700 years ago. This quote was from the Malay Annals, describing Singapore in the 14th century. Singapore was already a vibrant trading hub 700 years ago, when it was formerly known as Temasek. But why does knowing Singapore's history matter? Imagine if you had to introduce yourself to other people, but you weren't even sure of how old you were or what you did in the past. That's why we need to understand our history, so that we can figure out who we are and who we want to be moving forward. Welcome to Proof of Concept, a series of videos where we explore Singapore's history in a light-hearted, easy-to-digest format. Today's episode looks at early or ancient Singapore. The earliest account of Singapore was probably by a Chinese envoy in the 3rd century, who mentioned Singapore as Pulau Ujong. The envoy also goes on to mention that the island is full of cannibals with tails that are 6 inches long. Not the most accurate, but we'll take it for now. Eventually, at some point, Singapore became part of the Srivijayan Empire. Singapore then was known as Temasek, and was mentioned by Wang Dayuan, a Chinese traveller, in his travel blog, Dao Yi Zhi Lue, or a brief account of island barbarians. In the book, Wang describes Temasek in the 14th century as being very hot, having poor soil and little rice fields, lots of rain and flooding, and being prone to piracy. He also describes the entrance to Temasek, which were a pair of rocks that were shaped like dragon's teeth, which were blown up by the British a long time later. In 1320, even the Mongols were buying elephants from Singapore, and the Vietnamese had already established contact with Temasek. Wang also describes a settlement called Pancha, or Pantu, which is today's Fort Canning Hill. Pancha produced sandalwood and cotton, and was also involved in trading precious metals, porcelain, and satin. The people there were honest, had short hair, and wore red clothes. There was a Pancha Larangan, or forbidden spring, for female family members of the king, a fruit orchard, glass workshops, and probably a temple. Why is it that Singapore was already a bustling port in the 14th century? Its location at the bottom of the Malay Peninsula meant that everyone who wanted to sail to China needed to pass by Singapore, kind of like the turnstile gates at the MRT station. Furthermore, it was also around this time that Temasek eventually became Singapura. According to the Sejarah Melayu, Raja Chulan encamped at Temasek and was ready to head on to conquer China. The Chinese, however, decided to trick Raja Chulan, where they sent a boat full of old men, rusty needles, and grown fruit trees to convince Raja Chulan that China was too far away and that the young sailors had already grown old by the time they arrived at Temasek. Raja Chulan, not bothering to use Google Maps or book a SIA flight to China, decided to settle down in Palembang. Raja Chulan then supposedly fell in love with a fairy princess who lived under the sea. He then had 3 sons, one of which was Sang Nila Utama. In 1299, while Sang Nila Utama was hunting on Bintan, he climbed up a hill and saw Singapore. He then sailed to Singapore but encountered a big storm. In order to calm the storm, he threw his crown overboard so that he wouldn't have to pay taxes when he reached customs, before reaching Singapore safely. While hunting on Singapore's Padang, he encountered what was probably a tiger, but called it a lion anyways, and named the island Singapura. Here's where things get complicated. So far, there has been no evidence of whether Sang Nila Utama ever existed. Some historians argue that Temasek's name was changed to Singapura to change the Malay name Temasek to a Sanskrit name to modernize Singapore's name. Others suggest that a subsequent king of Singapore, Paramiswara, changed the name to Singapura to highlight his independence from the Majapahit Empire and to re-establish the lion throne he had set up in Palembang, just like how Liho renamed themselves when Gongcha left. No matter whether Sang Nila Utama existed, Sang Nila Utama helped to symbolize the legitimacy of the Malay rulers, who could claim to be the descendants of the Srivijaya Empire and had a historical claim over the region. On Sang Nila Utama's son, Sri Pikramawira, had to defend Singapore twice. The first time was against 70 Siamese junks, and the second time was against the Javanese Majapahit Empire. When King Hayam Wuruk of the Majapahit Empire ascended the throne and demanded that Singapore submit to the empire, Sri Pikramawira told Hayam Wuruk that he would have to shave his hair, like those BMT barbers, should he ever come to Singapore. Naturally, this led to many rounds of diplomatic negotiation in ASEAN. Okay, I'm kidding here. The Majapahit Empire instead sent 180 warships, while Singapore sent out 400 warships in return. Some quick maths meant that Singapore won after 3 days, and also because the Majapahit Empire were inexperienced in naval warfare. In total, 4 generations of Sang Nila Utama's children ruled Singapore. The last king of Singapore, Paramiswara, also known as Iskandar Shah, was the most interesting because he lost the throne. There are 2 accounts of Paramiswara. The first version is by the Sejarah Melayu, where Iskandar Shah accused one of his concubines of adultery and punished her by stripping her naked in public. In revenge, the concubine's father and court official, Sang Rajuna Thapa, pledged his support to the Majapahit king. In 1398, the Majapahit Empire sent over 300 ships and more than 200,000 men to invade Singapore. However, the troops could not break into the fortress, probably because of a brick wall 5 meters high and 2.5 meters tall that surrounded Fort Canning Hill, now called the Old Lines of Singapore. Sang Rajuna Thapa lied that the grain stores were empty, starving the people inside the wall, and even opened the gate to the Majapahit invaders. Iskandar Shah fled to Malacca, where he set up the Malacca Sultanate, durian chendol, and chicken rice balls. The Portuguese account, written by Oden pharmacist Tome Pires, claims that Sang Nila Utama and Iskandar Shah are basically the same person, Paramiswara, who was a Palembang prince that tried to challenge Javanese rule over Palembang, failed, came to Singapore, assassinated the local ruler Sang Aji, and then ran to Malacca after the kingdom of Patani attacked, in revenge for Sang Aji's assassination. Then again, the Portuguese did conquer the Malacca Sultanate, so maybe it makes sense for them to do some character assassination about the origins of the Malacca court to discredit the royals. With Paramiswara or Iskandar Shah's escape, Singapore subsequently fell into a period of obscurity. But that's for next episode, where we uncover how Singapore ended up being talent scouted by the British to become a new colony. So what did we discover today? Firstly, that Singapore wasn't a sleepy fishing village or a mudflat in the past, and that we do actually have quite a long history. We were a vibrant trading emporium, and we did manage to survive and to thrive through good relations with neighbouring powers, and by also having a strong defence. Neither the British, nor the Chinese, or any immigrant group alone can claim to be the sole reason for Singapore's success. We can be proud of our own indigenous success, and that we do not need foreign powers to conquer us in order to make us special. Secondly, we also can't take Singapore's current status for granted. Sure, Singapore was also fairly successful in the 14th century as Singapura, but it also got massacred and burned to the ground. We will need to continue to have good leaders, policies, and relations with other countries if we want Singapore to continue to survive. Well, that's all the motherhood statements I have for this episode, but stay tuned next episode if you want to find out the juicy drama between Raffles and Farquhar. Till then, stay safe and stay curious.